So, the stormwater workshop, is our way of, keeping in touch with the citizens of the city of Tucson. Explain what we're working on, get feedback from the citizens, and, go over discussion topics related to stormwater quality. The city of Tucson has a permit through the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. And the permit was updated, and we are required to have this stormwater workshop annually. And it's just kind of a way to get public involvement with the program and also to educate the public on stormwater quality issues. One of the important aspects of what City of Tucson does for stormwater management is that the city actually has a stormwater ordinance. Not all municipalities have a stormwater ordinance, but this ordinance assists us with compliance for stormwater quality issues. One of the key tools that the city uses is what we call the corrective action plan. It's in the ordinance, and it says you are required to provide a corrective action plan if you're not working with the city to address the stormwater quality problem. And so that requires a special report by an engineer to be submitted. And so that kind of encourages compliance. It's been a very helpful tool for us. And then with the new permit, there's various things with the new permit. One of the items is that, you know, like I said, we got the workshop annually. And then also we have a retrofit project feasibility assessment requirement. And what that is looking at locations where we can look at doing certain types of stormwater retrofitting to see if we can reduce our pollutants in a particular area. We have a proposed stormwater retrofit feasibility project report into the state, and there's several sites for that. And then I won't be going over that particular report today. I actually don't have the report, so I'm gonna. What I can touch on is another project that is not part of the report, but it's a retrofit project, and that is our. We have issues with our student housing buildings sometimes. Some of the student housing projects end up being constructed in a manner that is not taking in consideration stormwater quality requirements. And so some of the structures have provided certain aspects that are compliant, but some of the structures have not. And so what we try to do is get them to fix these issues. One of the ideas, though, is to look at what we can do up front when projects come in for proposed student housing or large buildings where there's very little setbacks. So what we want to make sure is that we're accommodating for certain stormwater related issues. For instance, is there an area for solid waste pickup area where typically maintenance employees can come and spray down the concrete parking area and focus that water to a sanitary clean out instead of it running out into the street and then running down through a residential neighborhood, for instance. So that's an example. Another one is making sure that jacuzzis or such pools and whatnot properly plumbed to drain to the sanitary system for backwash. And so there's various aspects, and that's one of our projects that we're working on, and we're going to be working closely with our Planning and Development Services Department and the building official to see if we can work to see how we could get stormwater review augmented to address these stormwater considerations. Stormwater topics of interest. There's a sheet that I've handed out, and I'll have to provide that to the folks at a later date. I didn't save that to put in the chat box, but I'll provide it at the end of the meeting so that folks that are on virtually can add their information. But essentially, it's suggested stormwater management workshop topics of interest for next year. So maybe there's a particular topic you'd like to have touched on or discussed in the workshop for next year. You can give us, a handful of suggestions or three. And we're also asking for feedback on the workshop. Part of our stormwater annual reporting talked about how we were going to work to include how do we improve on our outreach for disposing of contaminated water. This has been a serious issue because when you have, let's say, a business that does, it could be anything from an environmental cleanup business to a, what do you call it, a herbicide or pesticide businesses, those types of things. Those can cause a vulnerability to our storm drain system if their protocols are not being done properly. So if a business gets contaminated water from their activity and then turns around and it dumps it in the street somewhere, oh, look at what I'm doing. This becomes a serious problem because those types of pollutants get into our storm drain. As a reminder, for those who may not know, the city of Tucson is an MS4, and so that's a municipal separate storm sewer system. And that, unless I missed one of the S's, but essentially what that means is the city of Tucson has a separate sanitary system from the storm drain system. So when the rain gets into our drain, it carries with this pollutants, and that gets down through the storm drain system, through channels or ditches or storm drain pipes, and ends up into water courses that end up leading to our regional water courses. And the regional water courses is where we have our highest infiltration rate. So it's a vulnerable system. And the sanitary system is a program through Pima County, and that sanitary system is entirely separate. So people sometimes misunderstand and dump maybe their soda into the catch basin thinking, oh, well, that's just going to go to a waste treatment plant. Well, it does not. It goes into our groundwater areas, infiltration areas. So back to these infiltration areas, the city of Tucson has a high density of potable wells. These wells are both public and private throughout the city, and they are approximately, I saw one map, and it was a matrix of different points throughout the city. And I thought, well, there's an average distance there, and it was 800 feet. And so imagine every 800 feet a well, and this is drinking water. And I don't know how many of you have lived in a spot where you lived off of a well. I have. So yeah, so there's a few people that know that this is, and it's an important part of our water system. And so water quality is so important for the city of Tucson, more so than other municipalities, because of our high density potable well situation. And so groundwater contamination is very important for the city to avoid. And so we're taking efforts to we're working with the state, and they are working with, I think it's the military, on the PFAS cleanup on the south side, north side of the Davis Mountain. And we're also, it's similar to the TCE cleanup. Those groundwater monitoring wells are still active to make sure that we're getting groundwater plume contamination cleaned. But we also look to make sure that we're doing our part for surface water quality to help to minimize pollutants into our storm drain system, which eventually get into regional water course. Again, the most highest infiltration rates are located in the areas of the regional water courses. And I'll show you a map here, if I can bring that out. So that the city of Tucson has a large number, a large area of harder soils. I can't type and talk at the same time. Tucson. And so unlike other areas, the surrounding areas of the city, like Marana and other portions of the unincorporated county, city of Tucson has these harder soils that, but the more infiltrating soils are in a major water courses and the regional water courses. If you go to map Tucson, you can open our city flood data set of beams, and a couple things to make it a little bit clearer to see. And I'm also gonna, so the map will come to this point here, and then you'll type in your location up on the top right. But I'm just gonna go and quickly show you information here. So soil type is listed here, and you can see, let's just pick one of these here. Uh-oh. So you can see there's sea soils. So what we find here is that sea soils are predominant throughout the city, and so are D soils. You don't see that as much in other jurisdictions. And so that this lends itself to a couple of challenges. You can see the large area of sea soils. So the C and D soils are those harder areas. A and B are infiltrating types. And so from a water harvesting perspective, it means that the sustainable design is detention, where we can use an inlet and an outlet positive gradient to make a sustainable design that will allow slow retention of the water and so that you don't have a ponding problem. And that's what we're trying to avoid. You know, we just went through COVID. We don't want to go through, you know, West Nile virus. You know, that fluctuates over the years, but, you know, it is reduced dramatically by the use of detention. Frequently, I've worked with consultants where their projects were constructed, and the inspector had, Dave, I don't know how many times he's had to call me and say, Liz, I've got a basin. It's, you know, they're close to getting final here, but the basin's been standing water for 3 days. So our drain down time is 24 hours. That's trying to coincide with the gestation period for mosquitoes so that we reduce that mosquito issue. And so what we end up doing is spending approximately 6 months working with their engineer, you know, that costs extra time to the developer, extra effort for city staff, extra time for contractor, et cetera, et cetera. And this then ends up being retrofit, where in one case, I remember the engineer was one of the top engineers, and he said, hey, Liz, I saw your comment said consider doing detention, because you have, they had a retention proposed for the basin. And I just said, consider it. I didn't say they had to change it. And he said, well, you know, my geotechnical report is indicating that I have drain down time. I said, you're just on the line on that. You know, you have your safety factor, but you're just barely meeting it. And you know, you're gonna need to probably call me up at the end and work with me on a retrofit. And he says, oh, I'm gonna keep that bit clean. I'm gonna put my stormwater controls around. I'm not gonna have any construction vehicles in the basin to compact that basin. I'm gonna do all I can to make sure that basin functions. And again, it ponded 3 days. Dave calls me up, tells me about it. And it took them about 6 months, and they ended up having to put a pipe, you know, create a quasi detention basin by adding a pipe to bleed off the water. The pipe had to go underneath the roadway and then exit into a ditch on the other side of the road. However, the basin was so deep that in order to have a positive gradient to the ditch, the basin bottom was lower than the pipe. So the basin is like this, you got a pipe exiting like that. And so you ended up with a remaining portion still in retention. So they had to get a geotech report again to do an infiltration test to prove that that last 1.5 feet was infiltrating. So these are the problems with retention that developers and contractors should try to avoid. And that can be done by doing a design that incorporates detention aspects so that you don't have this headache at the end. Because retrofitting a retention basin is probably one of the most expensive type of and time-consuming efforts that has to be done. So I just wanted to touch base on that topic. And question?
I guess more of a comment that I think it's important to distinguish between a large detention or retention basin scenario, exactly what you're talking about, versus small scale distributed water harvesting, because
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So what we found is that 4 to 6 inches of rainwater is a very doable water harvesting depth that can function and does work in the city of Tucson area. In some cases, it can have, maybe there's super hard D soils and it doesn't perk. So we might have to check that with a perk test. But overall, the 4 to 6 inches is a successful depth for water harvesting. When you exceed 6 inches, that ends up being borderline on whether or not we need to have infiltration testing to prove that it will perk. So we do want to try to limit the depth on our water harvesting features so that there's the opportunity for evapotranspiration, for the tree roots to suck up that water, and for some of the water to soak into the soil. In some cases, amending the soil can assist for small projects. If it's a large basin, however, we've seen in the past that augmenting, digging down, changing up that soil has not necessarily improved infiltration rates unless it's getting down to a certain lens where the change in infiltration rate provides an exit point. There are some retrofit designs that have worked in the past. I believe one of the geotech engineers that's online in the meeting today was the originator of this solution, and we use it and suggested we don't do design, but we do tell people there is a solution for some scenarios for retrofitting, and it's called a kind of an infiltration trench. It might be 2 to 3 feet wide, X number of feet deep, depending on where that lens is, where if it turns out there is a lens that's deep enough to get the infiltration to work. And so this big trench is dug all through the center line of the path of the basin, and it's wrapped in a filter fabric, and then a clean, uniform sized rock is provided in the trench area. And that allows for a solution for retrofitting failed retention basins. And so I'm gonna move on to the next topic so we have time, because we only have 5 minutes left. Let's drop down to our homeless in the water courses. Angel, did you have your thumb drive? Do you want to pop it in there? We are going to talk about homeless in the water courses. The problem with the homeless in the water courses is there's some sort of something. Does anybody know how to plug that in? Nobody? Okay.
Down there.
Oh, yeah, this time. Here it is. So some of the issues with homeless in the water courses are obviously the drug paraphernalia and the drugs, the feces, the urine, all that type of thing, increase E. coli in our water courses. There's also flood and erosion hazard aspects that we didn't talk about in the first meeting. And in one case, we're seeing one section of wash needing approximately it's $400,000 to $800,000 of improvements due to terracing in a water course. So they're digging out stairs and terrace areas, and then creating their encampments on these terraces, but they're still in these FEMA flood zones, where velocities are high during a regulatory flood event, and easily they could be drowned. So what occurs is instead of a uniform side slope in a channel, you're going to have these localized scour potentials and erosion hazard conditions. And this creates cutbacks in the channels and increases the hazards to neighboring parcels and buildings. See if we can open up a couple of these photos, and then we'll be how do I do that? Anybody at work? That we didn't do. Angel, do you remember how to do this from last time?
It's in the flash drive, wherever.
It's a look for your driver.
Wall one. It'd be in the documents.
Does anybody, you know,
No, it's just pictures.
Oh, okay.
you know where this drive is?
Just not showing.
There you
Not reading it.
No. Looks like we're not gonna share pictures, this time.
I-
We're moving in. Oh, Scott might be able to open something. So, part of our issues with, the homeless are that, you know, they're at risk for drowning. They're in a vulnerable area. They're blocking flow with encampments. We see barbecue sets put up. There's a huge volume of trash in these areas. Fires are occurring inside the box culverts. This actually can cause spalling, which is a deterioration of the top of the culverts. That could cause a serious hazard if the culvert over time fails. And if you have a road over it, could cause subsidence to the pavement above. That's a long-term issue. We haven't seen that. I know Phoenix has had problems with that. They've had to replace bunkers. We also have problems where we had a homeless group that was in box culvert. There was a sanitary sewer line. This was done way back when. We don't typically have a sewer line crossing a storm drain, but they had decided that was a good spot. They probably hang things over the sewer line that's crossing, and inside the culvert, they set up a fire, and the fire ends up burning the pipe. The pipe spews sanitary sewage, and it goes down for several hundred feet. They were actually that far in. It goes into a natural water course. It was next to a Tucson water site. We didn't understand how the water site was discharging water that smelled weird. And they were saying, it couldn't be us, you know. We had everybody searching for this. We ended up finding the problem. The county had to come in and factor and suck up all this. It took them 2 to 3 days of removing sewage from a water course. Fortunately, it was very close to what we call WOTUS, Waters of the U.S., Santa Cruz River. It did not reach WOTUS, thank goodness. But these are serious issues that engineering is seeing. We don't want to have the homeless die. We don't want to have housing and neighboring properties have you know, these how do I scroll through it?
You see the arrow keys.
So we don't want to have these problems. These are obstructing flow. You can see it could back up and cause problems where you're going to have people, you know, neighboring properties as the water comes up from being blocked. The floodplain now spreads out and impacts areas that weren't previously in the flood zone. You can see the amount of debris that's left behind. This unfortunately is a problem that we are trying to figure out how to solve. We have a lot of these mobile units that are actually dumping their sewage into the ground. This is absolutely illegal. You can see there's water dropping off there, and there's people underneath. Another mobile home. Angel, chime in when you need to. Another sanitary issue. You can see they set up their house in these box culverts.
That was a shower that they broke the water line.
Oh, this is a shower. So they actually tap into a potable water line, which is really bad because you don't want to contaminate potable water lines. And so this is a serious issue. Here's a carved out area that's man-made into a house that got tile countertops. And this area was cleaned out, but it was a encampment. So they build their own house. They don't have a permit. They didn't get a plan review, and they're in a floodplain. Okay, here's a camp, and they even got how, their cars. Some of these folks, there's two, it appears to us that there's two groups. There's a group that, they are down and out, and they've got financial, obviously, issues, and they're needing a place to live. And those folks, we do have so many avenues and groups and programs that can help those folks. And then there's the other group that are the ones that use drugs and they have mental health issues. And they, the drug users, their priority one is they want their drug. It's nothing else. It's not water quality or flood safety. So they have solar panels, they have, they steal electricity, they wash out their underwear in the parks, children fountains. These are reports from our other staff, parks staff. Here's a large quantity of homeless debris. And I think this is another shower tapping into the water line. Angel?
It's a burning building, homeless burned it, and all the debris just goes into the wash, into the waterways. Just keep going. That's damage to the rodeo wash, vehicles driving in and out of the wash. Just trash. Stealing water from one of the nearby businesses. That homeless man was living in an RV, he dumped the sewage on the ground, and for a couple of dollars, he cleaned it up. So that's what we have to do sometimes, because.
Yeah, so when we have what we call illicit discharge, and we catch the person, we say, hey, you'll need to clean it up. And then that's case closed. In this case, this person actually took the effort to make amends.
I think that one's up for sale.
Oh, and this is a very large
So
encampment.
when Elizabeth's talking about the MS4 and these hard soils and storm to shade and all these other programs, keep in mind that all these photos are being taken basically in the wash already, or the water is going to be entering the regional water course. So it's highly contaminated. It's going right into the soil. There is a lot of narcotics, bodily fluids, fire, the stuff that they burn, the copper wire to get the copper, chemicals. They use lice, to kill the lice on their head. So all this stuff is actually going into the into the ground. It's not like it's on pavement. This is actually in the washes itself already, and this is one of the biggest things that's going on with TDOT and Environmental Services, cleaning them up as quickly as they can. So just scroll through the photos. They go to businesses and they use, behind the dumpsters, they go to the bathroom. Businesses don't want to clean it up. They don't think it's their responsibility. The trash people don't want to clean it up, and that's where we have this argument. Who cleans up what now? So on private property, and all this causes blockage. So sometimes the homeless think that the water's not coming through, but it's just from every culvert to every culvert, there's a blockage somewhere. And eventually, once it breaks, the water's coming through, and then that's when you have your people in the swift water rescue. And you'll see some of the photos right now where last year we pulled out 4 people from Blackledge in Columbus from that wash itself. Right now, you'll see. So these people were showering on railroad property, and that one was. It took us a while to get that taken care of. Yeah.
Contaminants from this.
See, there's a shower where they tapped into the Tucson water line.
That increases contamination potential to the potable water.
That's a swimming pool that they had at that other camp that you saw earlier. Shopping carts, all this is Esteban Park, where they had a huge fire. There's tons of contamination on the ground, and it costs the city a lot of money to clean up. There's a lady that we had to pull out.
So in this instance, residents were coming out and saying, I'm gonna go down there and get you. And luckily, we had Angel there, because Angel was telling the residents who were up on the bank, do not go down there, do not go down there. And then what did you do? Get a rope or
So
what?
we
did you
used an
do?
extension cord and a rope, and we make, we pulled her out of the wash, and she was worried about her friend in one of the other slides. And once we pulled her out, she just took off. She forgot about her friend. That guy was just picking up the needles and throwing them into the river. He was cleaning out his bin because he had nowhere else to put them.
This huge volumes, tons of trash that we're cleaning up annually. This is an increase since 2014, when we started to see an increase in homeless activity. It's,
So this trash is right on the city street. It just sits there and it accumulates. They've had rats infestation, rodents, flies, and it's just.
well, this is the other book.
Yeah, that's the gentleman that was in there too.
Elizabeth, can I
So,
make a comment?
yes,
I'm Greg from Pima County Flood Control, so we have the same issue. Homeless encampments have become a much larger portion of our budget. We've had a big shift in the county from the 2004 bond election, when everything was about construction, to the point where 60–70% of our budget is now maintenance. And that splits between sediment and homeless camp removals. So since we have the emergency management people here, we've also had a few recent events where in the after action reports, we clarified who is responsible for removals, because what happens is police and fire go out for swiftwater rescues. I can tell you that the fire guys think swiftwater rescues is their worst day. They're happy to deal with structural fires. They don't like going in the water. But then, the fire department goes out and rescues somebody, but then who's responsible for removing the Jeep that drove in there in the first place? So, flood control gets the citizens' complaints, right? Because somebody's dumping in the wash, or there's homeless in the wash. And so there's always this siloing between the transportation department and the flood control department about who really owns the culvert. Is that drainage or is that a road? Right? So that's an important issue to address in the plans moving ahead, is the communications. And I think I don't know the right word for the cooperative agreements between the response agencies. But
yeah,
that's
we have an
something we need to
IGA.
improve.
Yeah, there's an IGA where regional flood control is maintaining the regional water course sections. Majority of the other portions are city of Tucson. And it was our streets department working on this action item, but it became an environmental issue. And so it was moved to two avenues. One is our environmental services department. And then the other avenue is we have hazard companies that we have to hire, because some of these sites are too hazardous for staff.
And to that point, just one last thing is, our inspectors, there's certain places they don't go without the sheriff. So that adds a huge operational cost. And then, of course, like the city of South Tucson has asked us to put gates on a lot of these, but then that becomes someone drowns, right? So, because they get trapped. So that's another kind of physical design issue for resolution, is how can you keep these good shelters?
We've been talking with TPD. You see, there's a no trespassing sign there.
Yeah.
And so we tried to eliminate, they said a hard sign is a citable sign, but it still comes back and who cleans it up? And then they go down and then they get released 4, 5, 6 hours later and they smooth down the wash. So it's like a yo-yo effect, but we try to implement that with TPD and our city codes. And it's just like I said, a yo-yo effect. It's hard.
But it's hitting the transportation departments and flood control departments really heavily on their budgets, and it's not really
Yes.
transportation or flood control issue.
Yep.
Have the mayor and council and the board of supervisors seen these photos?
We invite our board office to this meeting, and
This is, I don't even know how to have the words. Even now that's an environmental break that people smell. This needs to be on the agenda for both those.
yeah, I know that in our department, we have one of our administrators is working with another group of stakeholders. And I think it's a group of people that, I think they've got maybe police department and some other stakeholder, community housing, and they're meeting and discussing it. I actually have a spreadsheet. It talks about human access control options. And it's like 3 pages long of different options that could be used to deter the activity. Part of our problem right now is we're looking at wanting to put up grates on some of these box culverts. The problem with this is you'll have a storm event and water's going to be rushing and you're going to have a pinned person, whether it's a homeless person, maybe it's a recreational user walking through, or, you know, a kid that's playing, oh boy, I'm going to take my little boat out or something. I don't know. So we're scared and we don't want to have a fatality with a pinned drowning scenario. And so that is one of our big issues. It appears the state also agrees. We've talked to the state engineers about that, and they are also backing off on that risk issue. So we are looking at other alternatives. I do have a long list. I'd love to share with somebody. I think it's, you know, provides various avenues to take. Because this is not good, you know, for the environment. It doesn't look good for the city. And, you know, we cannot go down the route or the solutions that other jurisdictions have done. And whether it's looked the other way, I'm not sure what this is. And we need to do what successful jurisdictions are doing. So I understand there are jurisdictions that have been able to turn around some of these, you know, the drug use type and get them clean by certain programs. And this, I think, is what we should be focusing on, those jurisdictions that actually are seeing success in their programs, not the ones that are failing. And I was in a meeting a few months ago. It was California and the rest of the United States in this stormwater meeting, and they were talking about various issues, and they admitted wholeheartedly that they were failing. And the California governor had pulled their homeless funding because they weren't producing results. They're diving. It's getting worse. And they were admitting in the meeting that they were failing. So, you know, we've got to look at alternatives that have seen success. And so we're trying to do that. And I know that there's some activities I've been watching. I think it's Vegas or Nevada. They've got some success with some of the controls that they've used. So I'd like to wrap up the meeting. We're way beyond our time. And I want to thank you for joining us. And you can fill out your form and I'll provide that to the online folks if they're still there. And just leave that with Scott over here. And you can post questions in the chat at a later date, or you can email me. We've got our cards over here. Is there any burning questions before we end? Yes.
Is it safe to say that any project the city is doing on their own property, they will abide by all these things we discussed today? In other words, if it's a city project on city property, they will address these issues that we discussed today?
The city of Tucson is not above the codes and regulations. We have to follow our own codes and regulations.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Is there any questions? Oh, I see there might be some steam.
Questions for you?
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah. We have a couple of items here.
Busy, huh?
I do, yes. Once things calm down a little bit, I know that he's gonna have something to cap and
What?
John got like some information. on it.
Yeah.
Campsites. Okay, so
You have transportation, then you have water.
Sophie, I don't have to answer your question. I'll have to get back to you. It looks like Daryl's left.
Reaching out to you. Okay.
And they're like, yeah, we're.
What happens is, you know, my coworker, he has 30 years experience. What is the city proposing? And then we'll take the time to evaluate, you know, if it's solved into the map.
Works great.
Give them the session.
Even though. You got the fabric of the social life. I like to keep that.
Everybody's there, we should be taking care of it.
Yeah, Steve was in, they haven't, I haven't seen it yet, they've been talking about open tax